folks. Welcome back to CrimsonCast.
Talking to the producer on the side.
I thought it was a little head snap to start the podcast just to keep people on their toes slightly and also to exercise my neck. But it didn't work. It was almost like one of those intros to like an 80s television show, where you got the theme music going in.
Yeah, it looks like getting ready for a Sears photo shoot, like just whip shot and yeah. This is almost to restart the pod. I'm not sure where we're at.
It's all good. Anyway, hello again for those of you who already listened to the football recap pod.
We do basketball too.
We do basketball too. It's
we started.
We are back, and basketball's back, and the season starts this week. So our yearly Indiana men's basketball preview, and obviously we'll have a lot of podcasts coming up after that. But we haven't talked much about the team, because there's been so much to talk about with football. Right. And obviously our friends over at Assembly Call have been covering things on the men's side. Our friends at Doing the Work and the Dribble Drive have been doing things that need to be done on the women's side. But we're going to talk men's basketball today. It's going to be a very unique year in a lot of ways, not just in terms of the on-court aspects of IU basketball, but really it feels like a potential sea change just in terms of the program itself and the vibes around it, the atmosphere around it, everything that feeds into the perception of IU. And that's, I think, a really important thing to be talking about as we go into this new year because of everything that's happened over the last decade and really everything that's happened over the last 2 decades. It's just been an interesting time to be an IU basketball fan. And Scott, you and I have been talking.
It kind of started when we went to college.
It did, yes. I mean, but even slightly before that. But it's been just an odd last quarter century plus for this Indiana basketball program, and they find themselves at a crossroads. The athletic department finds itself, I think, at a bit of a crossroads with the program, and so after some soft or light resets that have been attempted, a really hard reset has now taken place in Bloomington. And it's more than just the stuff that's on the court. So we're going to talk through all of that, talk about the players on the team this year, and try to figure out exactly what to expect out of this Indiana team. Scott, we've been doing these preview podcasts for years now. And I mean, this is, I think, I don't know that we did not do a preview pod the first year we did the pod. We started about halfway through the season. But in the 16 or so preview pods that we have done, this might be the least certain that I've ever been about what we're going to be witnessing on the floor. And that's both exciting and also almost lends itself to a certain degree of distance and reserve because I just have no real clue what to expect when the rubber hits the road.
When we started doing this podcast, I would have told you that in 2 of the next 15 or 16 years, we'll have seasons where we're bringing back basically 0 players. Like, I guess the first Crean year, you brought back Finkelmeyer, which was, like a point per game. It's wild that we've now had 2 of these years where you're basically just entirely starting fresh. But to your point, unfortunately for worse, that first year with Crean, I think we kind of knew what to expect. We knew, all right, this may not be good. With this year, I don't think we're going to be last in the Big Ten. So I really, it's really a question mark, but it is wild that, once again, given a coaching change and just the different landscape of the way college basketball teams are put together, we are looking at another year where you have 0 returning anything from year to year.
And it's a very different college basketball than it was in 2008 when that last one happened. And it's a different set of circumstances just in general.
It's not comparing the two,
But it is an interesting thought process because you are talking about that was another hard reset for very different reasons, but it was still a hard reset. So I don't think that it's an off-base comp on your part or something to think about as a thought exercise, given that was really the first season that we really started looking at doing a podcast like this and starting to think about things on a more holistic level. So we'll get to all of that here in just a minute. First of all, just a reminder that CrimsonCast is brought to you by, along with the rest of the Back Home Network, by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. College basketball is a more numerous brand environment for Homefield. There's a lot of college football stuff. There's more college basketball stuff. on the home
They
field.
might have, I haven't looked at it. They might have gear from every school that our current team players played at last year.
Yes.
We need to look at it, but you might need to go through, like, I know they have West Virginia and Sam Houston. You just go through it. It's like, it's very possible that you could rep IU's current players, kind of give them a little love from last year's team with Homefield apparel.
Yes, Homefield apparel, of course, in addition to all of those teams that you could buy, you can also buy a huge amount of Indiana apparel that's focused specifically on basketball, from the white Assembly Hall words tee, for lack of a better term. I'm sure there's a better brand name for it than that, to the one with the Converse All-Stars on it, to that nice crew neck that looks like it's got the Assembly Hall logo in the middle. I mean, just so many different logos and different eras of IU basketball represented across the entire Homefield lineup. You can access that yourself at homefieldapparel.com. Use the code HOME23. Get 15% off your first order. Again, that's Homefield Apparel, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. CrimsonCast also sponsored by the Posh Hotel. Posh on Kirkwood, a boutique hotel located at the corner of Kirkwood and Washington. The finest in luxury accommodations for your next trip to Bloomington, particularly and especially if that happens to be in conjunction with an athletic event, as it's perfectly located right downtown. You can go get something to eat, get a drink at their bar, use the sauna to get yourself nice and relaxed ahead of time, and then use the complimentary shuttle to get a drop-off near the stadium. The Posh Hotel, with a variety of perks, only available in a luxury hotel, the first of its kind in Bloomington. Be sure to check them out at poshhotelbloomington.com. You can also follow them on Instagram at Posh Bloomington. And just a delightful property, Scott. And it's amazing that used to be a bank. You walk in and it's like, I can't believe this was a bank. This looks like a very swanky hotel. Multiple terraces on the outside for you to get beautiful views of Bloomington. Just everything you could want in luxury accommodations. Check it out, poshhotelbloomington.com.
No, you have the picture up if you're watching this on Spotify or YouTube, and it's like, that's in Bloomington. Like, that is a great looking hotel. Yeah. And even if you live in Bloomington, you can just go there, check out the Signetti Room. It's a great place to watch a game, have a drink. They have a Gable's Bagels there. But if you are coming in town for any games this season, we're going to have Assembly Call. We'll have their annual watch party this year. If you're coming in town for any of that, definitely look at staying at Posh. You're right there on Kirkwood, like you said, as the complimentary shuttles. It's a great place to stay. And Kirkwood is really, you can go there, go to the home field at tracks. You can do everything you need to do right there on Kirkwood. It's just great. So, yeah, it's so cool to have a hotel like that in Bloomington. And it's locally owned. So you're supporting a locally owned business.
And we'll be out there doing some live events throughout the course of this upcoming basketball season. So look forward to seeing you folks out there. Maybe join us for some of those events. We'll talk more about those on future episodes of the podcast. All right, Scott, let's dive into Indiana basketball, the 25-26 version. Indiana coming off another season where they did not make the NCAA tournament, and they turned down the opportunity to play in one of the other postseason tournaments. Last year's team, with their season coming to a close in the Big Ten tournament with a 72-59 loss to Oregon. So they were 19-13 in that final season of Mike Woodson's tenure. They finished the 4 years of Mike Woodson's tenure with 14, 12, 14, and 13 losses, which means now, stretching all the way back to the 2017 season, Tom Crean's last year, the number of losses Indiana has racked up per season.
I don't want to know. Let's just move on. Just 15 seconds. I don't want to hear it.
16, 15, 16, 12, 15, 14, 12, 14, and 13. This has been a mediocre-ass program for several years now. This has been the definition of kind of stuck in the middle or just below the middle of the conference. And that's why you've got another coaching change that's taken place. And it's why it hasn't just been a coaching change. It has essentially been a let's send the meal back to the kitchen and have them make it all over again kind of change. Like, this is where, in fact, we may have even ordered something. We ordered something entirely different off the menu because the first thing that got sent out, really the last couple of meals that have been sent out from the kitchen.
It's almost like, hey, can we do a DoorDash and have it brought to this restaurant?
Yeah. So Indiana, if you wanted to really kind of summarize the problems that IU's had over the course of this last 9 years, let's say, or 9 seasons, it's really been, I think, summed up by a couple of things. A, this team has not been fun to watch. The Archie Miller era was not fun to watch.
Right.
The pace was very slow. The offense was never great. The best Ken Palm offensive ranking that was registered by any of the Archie Miller teams was 65th in the country. They played fairly good defense during that time period. The Mike Woodson era really had that as well. There were some individual good moments. Obviously, the second season, Trace Jackson Davis's final year in a IU uniform had some good moments that culminated in a 4 seed, a second round appearance in the NCAA tournament, which unfortunately led to them being obliterated by Miami in the second round. And then they kind of fell into their bad patterns again. In the 4 years that Mike Woodson was in Bloomington, the offense ranked 95th, 28th, 105th, and 66th. And again, the defense was sufficient, not for championships or for deep runs in March, but was sufficient to win more games than you lost. And one of the big issues that this Indiana team has faced now for the last 8 years, we'll get that last year of Tom Crean and hold it off to the side, is the shooting's been not good, especially from long range. And this is unfortunately for Indiana an era where you got to shoot well from outside if you're going to be able to compete. So Indiana ends up going out and getting Darian DeVries, who coached at Drake for several years, coached 1 year at West Virginia, and then bounces from the Big 12 and comes to Bloomington. And they go out and get a bunch of shooters, and they find themselves now with a brand new team, and they find themselves with a situation where they got to figure out what exactly they're going to be and where that fits within the hierarchy of Bloomington. So ultimately, Scott, we're going to talk a lot about the individual players. We'll talk about Darian DeVries' coaching style. But the big issue that we talked about a bunch the last couple of years, and really it's been there for almost all of the last 9 years, that the second half of Woodson's second season was kind of the exception on all of this, is a program that fans have developed a pretty casual relationship with on purpose, because it's been a program that has not delivered the goods. And that really feels like the starting point for the beginning of the Darian DeVries era. It's a program that needs to figure out how to deliver the goods, because you can only trade off of past glories for so long. And it feels like the expiration date is finally hit for Indiana basketball on that front.
Yeah, I mean, the stats you laid out are pretty rough. I will also put it this way: we definitely had the expectation of national championships under Bob Knight, because he cashed in a lot of those. Like, he got to the Final Four more often than not. He won the national championship. But as that kind of faded away, it did feel like, you kind of, the next level was like, all right, well, we won a bunch of Big Ten titles. Like, that's what we've done. You mentioned a lot of the losses. I just went through and looked at just our record in the Big Ten since Kelvin Sampson left the program. Since 2009, we've only had 4 seasons. 4 seasons where we've been above 500 in the Big Ten. Not winning the Big Ten, just above 500. Woodson got one of those. Archie got none of them. Crean got a couple. Since 2013, we've only had 2 seasons that we've been above 500 in the Big Ten. And I think that's another problem, is we're not even close to competing for Big Ten titles. We're not even competing to be above 500 in the Big Ten. And you can have a couple of off years. You can have a bad coach here or there. This is just a wilderness time. It's funny. You look back on, we grew up in the 90s, went to school there. I would think back of, what it must have been like to be an IU fan during that period between Branch McCracken and Bob Knight, that 53 to 73 era where Indiana was kind of in the wilderness as well. And it's like, man, that seemed like a long time. We just lived through that, and we're there. And I mean, you and I were not alive at that point, but it felt like Indiana probably needed another kick in the pants at that point to kind of get the program started. But no, you are right that, up here I've mentioned this many times. My son's in youth basketball up here on the north side of Indianapolis. This is Purdue territory. I mean, they've taken it all. All the kids who play basketball, they want to go to the Purdue basketball camp. And honestly, they should. I mean, that's where they want to go, because that's been the program of definition for Indiana, for the state of Indiana for the last 20 years. And I think the fact that the fans kind of have a cavalier attitude and they're not coming, they're taking this team at arm's length. It isn't so much a DeVries thing. It isn't an NIL. It isn't a roster thing. To me, it's just, you put out a subpar product for 20, 25 years. You're under 500 in the Big Ten most years, fans are going to start kind of checking out. And I think that's what happened. And I agree with you. It does feel like we're at a point where, not that the checks come due, but just it's like, this is where we are at, that you're just not going to suddenly say, hey, Indiana's playing in Gamebridge. It's like, okay. Like, you're just not going to be selling out those games at this point. Like, you have squandered all of that era from, 1974 to 2001, all of that goodwill and a couple little peaks after that. It does feel like you've spent all of that, and now you're down at a zero balance.
Yeah, and it's obviously, I think, something that everybody's been interested in seeing, like, what's the solution to this,
Right.
and how do you fix it? And you've tried some different approaches. And look, I'll say this: I think that part of the problem has been the, how do I put this? There's been hires made coaching wise where the idea of what the culture is going to be has been a secondary thing. And I think Indiana's athletic department is aware of that, which is why I think they hired Darian DeVries, because there's clearly been a focus on a very different type of culture from
Right.
what has been the case for the last 9 years. And what I mean by that is essentially as follows. Like, the the lack of focus on playing hard, for lack of a better term, consistently across the board has been something that a lot of fans have noted, they've gotten frustrated by, and it's a dangerous thing to talk about sometimes because people will misinterpret what you mean by it. And my philosophy on it has always been, ultimately, there's a dividing line that you'll find between, and we see it in football. We're seeing it with IU football right now. Like, you can play hard aimlessly, or you can kind of just play sort of okay, but have a lot of talent and fall back on that. And for Indiana, they've, I think, had both of those approaches. Now, I think there were some moments in individual seasons where Indiana would come out and play really hard. And I think back to, like, the, whatever, I think it was the first year that Archie Miller was there, where they go up and win at Michigan State, or there were clearly some key games in that second season with Woodson. But it's not about playing hard in moments. It's about playing hard all the time. And that's what's been missing. And I don't think you can pin that necessarily on any one player or group of players or coach or coaching staff, but it has been an atmosphere that has led to a feeling that's almost amounted to a bit of apathy about how Indiana basketball is supposed to conduct itself. And this is the thing that is one of the hardest things in sports to try to chase down. It's certainly one of the hardest things in sports to try to maintain. And frankly, Scott, like you referencing us coming to college in the mid 90s, it was the thing that started to go away right during that same period of time,
Right.
where the difference in watching IU teams in the 70s and 80s and early 90s versus watching IU teams in the mid to late 90s and certainly into the 2000s was, you'd have great individual players, highly rated players, but there was a real lack of consistency in output and effort and execution. And that is generally the dividing line between teams that are competing for championships, teams that aren't. One of the reasons why Purdue has become the standard bearer for basketball over the course of the last decade in the state of Indiana is because, whatever you think of Purdue as a program, Matt Painter gets his players to play hard all
Right.
the damn time. And it shows. And that is attractive to people. And it gets results. And it attracts other good players who want to go play in those types of environments. And I don't know if Darian DeVries is the coach that will make that happen here, but I have to say, it's clearly a focal point for Darian DeVries, and you can see it in even just the two exhibition games that they've played. You can see it in the game that they play, the games they played down in Puerto Rico. Whatever the deficiencies of the team have been, they have come out and tried to play with much more effort and intensity, and that seems to be part of the initial DNA that this new IU basketball is trying to force itself into. We'll see if they can sustain it for a whole season, but I think, to go back to that Gamebridge game that I was at last weekend, to have so few people there, we talked a lot in previous seasons about the fans who would travel to go watch IU play, whether it was Atlantis last year, or whether it was Vegas, or whether it was New York, or or Atlanta, or any of the other places that they've been. And what made it so frustrating was you'd get this huge contingent of IU fans who would go and they would watch the team just get obliterated by teams that were working much harder than they were. Auburn in Atlanta sticks out. The games in Atlantis last year stick out. The game they got blown out in Vegas against Arizona sticks out. And it doesn't mean that they didn't have certain games where they did play hard, but they clearly got outplayed in games that mattered. It clearly happened in the Miami game in the tournament in 2023. That's got to change if you want people to start getting excited about IU basketball again. And that's going to be the fascinating challenge to build that in from the beginning with this IU program. DeVries and his staff have got to make that the core of what Indiana does. And we've seen programs lift themselves up because they've had that as a paradigm over the course of the last decade. Auburn being a great example, Tennessee being a great example, Florida being a great example, Alabama. I've named a bunch of SEC teams, but that's if you look at what those coaches have done, you look at what Danny Hurley's done at UConn. You can talk about the individual talent and how they play, but the effort and the intensity that they play games with has been the thing that has made those teams so fun to watch. It's made their fans so excited. If Indiana is going to get anywhere in this era, that's got to be where it starts, not the three-point shooting, not the other elements that you see in the stat sheet or in KenPom, but it's got to be that effort and that consistency of effort over the course of a full 30-plus game season.
You're just mentioning SEC schools to get our SEO up for ESPN. You're just trying to get just
like, come on, guys, come on.
Yeah, Vanderbilt, Auburn, just Florida, just saying a bunch of SEC names. And it's something that, I remember very early on in the Crean era, there was a game where Matt Roth had like 9 threes. And I either we talked about it, you and I either talked about it off air or on a pod, we had a pod at that time, but it's like, man, this team is not very good. But like the fact that he was able to run an offense to get a guy 9 threes when the team knew he was hot, it's like they were able to still run stuff. Like that's I was impressed by that. And you could see seeds of it early on of how hard those Crean teams played, even though they were getting obliterated game after game. And that's something that I want to see here with DeVries, not getting blown out, but just that echoing what you said, that hard play. Because you look at the start of Archie Miller's era and the start of the Mike Woodson era, they both kind of had moments where it's like, yeah, and Archie, it started early when you lose to Indiana State at home. And like, that's just a horrible start to the Archie Miller era, not to mention then losing to IPFW at home.
Right.
Not a great start. And then, the Mike Woodson, that first year, they lose 7 of 9 to finish the stretch in the Big Ten season. It's funny. You look at that second year and they did get a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, but I distinctly remember calling you, it was after that they lose to Arizona, they lose to Kansas, they had lost to Rutgers, then they lose to Iowa, at Iowa, home to Northwestern, and then at Penn State. They get obliterated at Penn State. And I remember after that Penn State game, it's like Woodson's second year, and you and I were talking, I called you afterwards. I'm like, something's wrong here. Now to their credit, they turned it around and figured that season out, in partially because of the play of Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace Jackson Davis. But you saw the seeds of some of those things coming in early in both of those tenures, and that's what I really hope we don't see again here. That you just see a team that plays hard, like you said, that's fun to watch, that has more modern basketball. In the end, it doesn't seem like it's that hard to just have a fun product out there. Crean was able to do it, but that's what we've been lacking for so long, is we're not getting the success. But as you said, it's not a fun team. It's just not been fun teams to watch. It feels more like work. This is unfortunately kind of the temperament of the last 2 coaches as well. Archie Miller just didn't seem to want to kind of play the marketing game and get into, courting fans. And then Mike Woodson kind of had almost an adversarial atmosphere, whereas like you were either on one side or the other. And I hope we just get out of all of that again. And just we get back to like, hey, we are all on the same team here. We just want this team to be better. And let's all just kind of row in the same direction.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, what's killed the last 2 coaching tenures has been IU, and really you could even, I think that you could actually throw this all the way back to what killed Crean's coaching tenure, has been the swoons that IU basketball have gone into in almost every season except 2023. Like if you go back to the 2017 season, that Indiana team lost 7 of 8 games between January and February. In 2018, they lost 5 of 6 in January into early February and lost their last 3. In 2019, Indiana lost 12 of 13 in a stretch. In 2020, they lost 5 of 6 and then lost 3 of 4. In 21, they lost 7 of 8 games
to finish the season. Good pace.
In 2022, they lost 7 of 9. In 2023, that was the one exception. And hey, shockingly, that was the one really good year out of this entire packet. And you thought, oh,
I will just they did lose 6 of 9 in the middle of this, from in December to January. But yes, you're right.
I'm giving them a little exception. But you thought, oh, maybe they're finally, do I dare say it, Scott, over the hump? But no, because in 2024, they lose 8 of 10. And then in last year, what killed that team, despite finishing relatively strong, was they lost 7 of 8. And so
you're right. When's the last year we haven't lost 4 in a row? Just gone through a Big Ten season where we haven't lost 4 in a row. Or how many times in the last 15 years have we had a season where we don't lose 4 in a row? And that is where you start to lose confidence throughout the year, and people start to just be like, man, this sucks.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot's been talked about with Archie Miller and his not connecting with fans. I actually think that's an overblown narrative. Archie Miller would have been fine if he just won games. It had nothing to do with connecting with fans. I don't know that connecting with fans would have extended his tenure another year, and it shouldn't have, because he didn't win enough games and his teams didn't play well. Mike Woodson, you're correct. The way that Woodson decided to attack the situation where his teams weren't winning enough games was to attack the intelligence of the fan base, as if you guys don't know ball, I know ball. And again, you can do that if you are winning games. But when you have a stretch that year where you've lost 8 of 10, and then you follow it up with another year where you lose 7 of 8, that's where you've not only lost the fan base, but the program, the way that it relates with its own fans, gets endangered. And so for anybody out there who is still on the fence about whether a change needed to be made, I don't think there's any of those people anymore. But every once in a while, you'll get somebody asking what has been wrong with IU basketball. A lot of it has been guys just haven't won enough games, and it lays bare the reality of why they're not winning games. Again, I think if you spread the number of losses out, if they're losing a couple in a row, but they're coming back and playing well, that taxes people's patience a lot less. And then to turn around and claim, as Woodson often did, that you're just 1 or 2 plays away, the constant, I'm going to get them over the hump because you don't have anything else to say on it. And meanwhile, fans aren't stupid. They're watching games. They're not seeing the improvement, and they're seeing players who are either overmatched for what they're being asked to do, or they're being asked to do things that don't make a ton of sense. Really creates a problem. And then you throw in the lack of recruiting success that the last couple of coaches have had, and Crean gets thrown into that category at the end as well. This is a malaise that has just settled over the program. I'm not telling people anything they already know on this podcast.
Well, and the other thing I'll throw in there too.
Yes, go ahead.
The other thing I'll throw in there too. You are 100% right. Just the spreading out the losses in a different way would help, but also just over the last 20 years, this is just a ton of people's fault. Have one signature crazy run, whether it's a Big Ten tournament title, whether it's a NCAA tournament run. You had those shots in 2012, 2013. Crean didn't cash it, and I think that stuck with him a long time. But, there were opportunities there. Like one of the year Archie lost in the Big Ten tournament. It's like they were playing Rutgers in the first round. Again, even just having a high somewhere. Yes, we beat Purdue at home when they were highly ranked. That's great. We still, there was the one year we made the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament and then lost in a crazy shot to Iowa a couple years ago. But it's like, even just if you would have had a run where one of those years you win the Big Ten tournament, that's something. we're still 500 in the Big Ten, but winning a Big Ten tournament would have been awesome. Or having a run in the NCAA tournament. Like maybe you, instead of getting obliterated by Miami, you win that and go to the Elite Eight. Like just any one of those things buys you even more. But like that is the problem. And that's where this malaise comes in, is you have basically a sub 500 team with no real peaks. The peaks we're talking about are like a 1-game win here or something there. And it's just, that's where you're at right now. And it's funny. I remember early in our podcast days, we also had a blog going. And I used to write articles about how we were kind of falling off we're no longer a blue blood, and kind of looking at, North Carolina and like Final Four appearances and, Sweet 16 appearances. Like, it's like after 10 years of that, it's like, it's not even close to discussing anymore. Yeah. Like you just, and this is where Indiana, the marketing has always been in a tough spot, because right now I do feel for them, because like you can't not market 5 titles and all of that, but it's also like at some point you have to realize who you are, and you can't market yourself as a blue blood. You have to realize like we need to kind of bring it back and almost need like fresh blood and market this kind of like IU football is. It's like, holy crap, like look at us, like look what we're doing. And in a way that's kind of what I think that would be a refreshing feel, is just a real hard reset. And just you can't go away from the history, but lean into some of the newness.
If it hasn't happened already, I think a lot of the people listening are like, okay, guys, we're going to preview this season, or are you going to keep talking about the last decade?
That's a fair point.
Fair criticism. So we apologize, but I do think it's important that all of that preamble come in, because now we try to focus on a team where the vast majority of the people who are consumers of IU basketball don't know any of the players, don't know the coach, don't know who's on staff, probably aren't even totally aware of who's on the schedule. And this is probably the biggest question mark season outside. Well, I would even say it's a bigger question mark season than 08-09, because at least in 08-09, everybody knew Indiana was going to be real bad, because they had no production and it was all freshmen. Fortunately, you don't have to do that in 2025, but you are also rolling the dice quite a bit if you're IU in terms of the roster that you've put together, because it is a bunch of players who are not brand names, shall we say, did not come from brand name programs. It's a fascinating study in how you build a roster and what kind of team you put together if you have carte blanche to basically zero a roster out and start from scratch, with the caveat that you don't just get to pick whoever you want. You've got to pick players that fit the system that you're trying to play. And you're also competing in an active and very, very player-friendly environment from a finance perspective, because you're having to spend money NIL-wise to try to bring these guys in. And you're competing with not just the big boys and the blue bloods, but you're competing with all the teams that want to get up into that mix. And so we come into this season with a roster that has a couple of players that are clearly going to be the focal points offensively. And I think we've seen that in everything that IU's done so far in the preseason. Of course, the lead in that is Tucker DeVries, Darian DeVries' son, who started his career at Drake, played last year at West Virginia for a little bit, got injured, and now finds himself as a super senior on this Indiana team. You've also got Lamar Wilkerson, who comes from a lower level of basketball than perhaps what most people would expect, but is a guy who is a very, very good shooter, is clearly good with the ball, played excellent at Sam Houston State, and was one of the more sought-after players in the portal. He comes to Indiana as well for his 4th season in college basketball, and he comes off a year where he had an offensive rating of 118.6, shot 43.4% from 3 and 50% from the field. DeVries is a player that I feel like we've seen the archetype for at Indiana before. I keep thinking from our era, he just reminds me a lot of Brian Evans in terms of his physical stature, although he's quicker than Brian Evans, and moves differently. But, if you go back and look at what he's done so far in his career, he has a career offensive rating of 112. He shot very well from 3 in the little of last season that he played, 47%, and shot 36% the previous 2 seasons at Drake. These these are two players that I think anybody would like to have on their roster. These are essentially the primary guys that Indiana is going to be relying on, it looks like, offensively throughout the course of this season. And then you got some other pieces as well. But I wanted to, we'll get into each of those pieces here in a second. But as you think about what you know about the roster, which I know is not a ton because you haven't seen them any more than I have, this is an interesting challenge for IU fans because they're going to be learning along with the team itself about how all these pieces fit together and what they need to do on a night in, night out basis.
At a high level, this goes with kind of the program building discussion. What I think is really interesting with this year is if you go to like Bart Torvik, which shows you the projected top contributors, of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the top 5 are all seniors, and 7 are either seniors or juniors. You have to go down to Trent Sisley as a freshman. So like what's really interesting with this year is we're going to basically be doing this again next year. Like you have this weird dichotomy where you're right, in 2008 it was all freshmen. Like this coming into this year, it's a really veteran team.
Yeah.
It's just not veterans that we know or we've seen.
It's a veteran team of guys who haven't played together before.
Right. And, but what's going to be interesting here is you can look, different sport, but I think similar parallels. You had Cignetti brought over guys that he had coached and he had coached in his system. So there is that major caveat difference. But, he looked at production, not potential. And he looked at guys who were at the lower level saying, these guys fit what I want to do. And it does feel like that's what DeVries kind of put together, because it's not like he was going the bargain basement. Like you said, Lamar Wilkerson was one of the top people in the portal, but he took a different approach than what we had seen over the last couple of years, where Woodson was definitely trying to get who's the top money getter in the portal. Those are the guys I'm going to get, and the big names from big programs. DeVries is doing something different. Now, whether he's getting guys that actually fit his system, we don't know. And the other question is, can, guys like, Reed Bailey, who played at Davidson, like, can they, who I think could be up there with Wilkerson and DeVries as a top contributor. That's another architect we haven't seen a ton of either, a 6'11" guy who can also shoot from 3. The question is, do top players in lower levels, lower leagues, are they going to be able to bring that to the Big Ten? And are they going to fit the system that DeVries is looking to play? I think the answer could honestly be yes. And I don't think yes means like we're going to win the Big Ten, but I could see this team being more competitive than we thought, because it does feel like DeVries was looking for an archetype and a type of player. And as odd as it sounds, having not seen all these guys together, this feels like a more put together basketball team than we had the last 2 years. Even though the last 2 years we were winning the portal and getting an A+ in talent in the portal, we always kind of knew it didn't quite fit together with how to play basketball. This team does feel like you have, I don't think we have a ton of size. I wonder about rebounding, but you look like you have the point guard in Wilkerson, you have the big guy in Bailey who can bring the defense out. You have DeVries kind of in the middle there. Like those are 3 all parts that seem to be working together. And then you look at the way that DeVries' teams have played at West Virginia and Drake, like it does feel like the pieces he has is the kind of team that he wants to build.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the players that DeVries went out and got in the portal, I agree with you. He's going after particular archetypes that fit the system, but he's also going after people that fit from a personality perspective, which I don't think Mike Woodson was doing, and I don't think Archie Miller was doing. At least if they did try that, they didn't do a very good job of it.
They're poor at it.
And so if you look at last year and the players that Mike Woodson brought in from the portal, yeah, they were highly rated, but they were pieces that seemed to be added without a real concern for how they would mesh with the personalities that were already on the team. And I don't know that the personalities that were already on the team were even that particularly well suited to play with each other. And that's a much deeper philosophical conversation that is probably best saved for a different podcast. But it does feel like they were purposeful in not just the types of players that they went out, but the types of people that they went out and got. And that's a very Curt Cignetti-ish kind of thing, where Cignetti has talked quite a bit about high character guys. And, what I think he means by that is guys that are coachable, guys that are focused and driven. And I think you're seeing the dividends for that, especially this year with IU football. When you talk about how well coached the team is, it's also a commentary on how they've gotten guys who are responding well to coaching. And that is a particular personality trait that you have to go out and find. because there's a bunch of guys that may not necessarily be that way. Now, when you think about this season and how they're approaching it, what I'm always curious about with this stuff is how does that manifest itself within the confines of a basketball season? And it's interesting because I did a little short video on this for subscribers only on the Substack, which if you'd like to join, by the way, it's CrimsonCast.substack.com, $5 a month, $50 a year. We normally do a couple of private videos a week just for people that are paying subscribers. We're going to do one right after this, actually, with a couple of extra thoughts. But Michael Ross, who's one of our paying subscribers, had the following, where he said, when they hired Woody, I was indifferent, but told myself I was going to take a step back from being emotionally invested in the program if his tenure was a failure. And that was coming from a lifelong fan. I've attended 5 Indiana Final Fours. That said, I've spoken with DeVries multiple times, and I'm on board with this new train. We may or may not make the tourney this year, but I'm convinced this season we'll see him win over fans that, like me, were just tired of watching something that was clearly not Indiana basketball. Get ready, Indiana fans. I think the next few years are going to see a lot of good football and basketball in Bloomington. Now, I haven't talked with Michael specifically about what he meant by that, but I'll take some license to describe how I would look at that, which is it goes back to the playing hard consistently thing from earlier, but it's also, I think, an attitude that the players have to have about how they are reacting to what's around them and how involved they are on a regular basis in collectively trying to push things forward, which didn't feel like it was always the case. I mean, even in the 2023 season, it felt like a lot of that was Trace Jackson Davis as a galvanizing leadership force, getting everybody on the same page. And that's, to some degree, that's not something that just happens. That's something that develops, and you have to purposefully go after players like that who can create that kind of culture and maintain it. We heard quite a bit throughout the course of that season. We've heard it with IU football. We've heard a lot of the commentators say, coaches can't really set the tenor of a season. That's really on the players. And the attitudes of the players, the way they react to each other, the way they react to fans, the way they react to the coaches, and how they create a culture. That is exactly what changed with IU football. Yes, Cignetti and his staff provide the superstructure, but they had to bring in that culture. And now you've got players that were here before Cignetti got here. You've got players that Cignetti brought with him from JMU. You've got players that have come from elsewhere, like Pat Coogan, who come in, and we heard, I think it was Mikhail Kamara talking about this after the football game yesterday. They bring that culture with them, and they bring that attitude with them. And that adds on to itself, and it makes a huge difference. And I just don't think, especially with Woodson, but I think also with Archie Miller, I don't want to just signal out Woodson. I don't think that was really a consideration because, A, I don't think Archie knew how to recruit those types of players at the power conference level. He could certainly do it at Dayton, but he couldn't figure out how to square recruiting rankings and guys that played hard and played with the right kind of attitude. And I think with Woodson, this was a criticism that was less a criticism and more of an observation that I heard. Woodson was used to coaching professionals, where that is not nearly as important. It can be transformative, like we saw with the Pacers last year, where you did have a bunch of guys that seemed to be in it with the right attitude to play together. But most NBA teams are not built that way. And it felt like Woodson was more focused on, well, this guy's good, so we'll put him in this spot, not how are they playing and how are they contributing holistically to a culture that creates a product that's more than the sum of its parts. And that, to me, when you talk about the guys that DeVries went out and got, it feels like that's been a huge factor. And we don't know if it's going to be successful, but it feels like it was a huge factor in the starting point.
So I want to focus for a second on the schedule this year, and how it ties into this, because I think what's really interesting, you look at the first 14 games, of those first 14, 10 are in Assembly Hall, one's in Chicago, one's in Indianapolis, and one is in Lexington. So you have 13 of the 14 games are all within, the Midwest territory. 12 of those 14 are in either home territory or area where you're going to have a possible good contingent of fans, Lexington notwithstanding, and then, of course, one road game at Minnesota. What's also interesting is, so I'm excited. We'll do some VIP stuff after. I'm going to the IU Marquette game with my son next weekend in Chicago. That, to me, that's a really key game here in the beginning part of the DeVries era, because if you win that one, there's a real path to go 8-0. And you look at the way KenPom lays out, it has us going 8-0 with our first loss in Louisville. It has that game against Marquette as a 55% win percentage. And to me, that's a key game. It doesn't really matter one way or the other, but like that would be one. It would just suck to see us get our doors blown off in that, or not be competitive. But that's a game where if you could start out 8-0, I'm even looking at it. There's a world where if you follow exactly what KenPom has our record as going into the beginning of the Big Ten season, we'd be 11-2, and if we beat Washington on January 4th, we're 12-2. And 1-2 or 2-0, 3-0 in the Big Ten. Like 12-2 is a great start. Now you're not going to keep that up, but that gives people like, whoa, something's kind of happening there. Like there's no loss to Indiana State. You're not doing the kind of things that have happened the beginning part of other tenures. So, but a lot of that hinges on that Marquette game. Can you get that win, or at least look competitive there? You're probably going to lose to Louisville. You're probably going to lose to Kentucky. That's fine. Can you stay competitive in those games? There's a couple of these toss-up games early on. Kansas State at home, that should be a win. How are you going to compete against them? At Minnesota, we've had trouble playing on the road anywhere. How do you do in that game? Home to Washington, you should be able to hold court. But I look at the beginning part of the schedule. I think it's very, very favorable to Indiana. And I think that if they're able to, and DeVries shown this at West Virginia. That is kind of the nice thing here is, we have an analog. DeVries did this at West Virginia, where he basically hard resetted a program at West Virginia, came out. They were not only competitive, they were beating Gonzaga at a tournament that we couldn't even compete at. They were very competitive to start the season. So if you use that as an analog, you would think that Indiana could be competitive in that game at Marquette. And I'm very intrigued by the schedule, and I think it lines up nicely to give a little bit of headwind. And if you're 12-2, and then it's like, all right, now
you mean tailwind, right?
Tailwind. Sorry. So yeah, no head. Yeah, sorry. Tailwind. Anti-headwind, pro tailwind. It can get you some, and then it's like now you have some good momentum going into those games in Assembly Hall in January, February, March, where you are going to need that home court advantage.
Yeah. If you look at what Indiana's got in terms of the schedule, and if you're watching along, I'm just shamelessly stealing the KenPom page and walking it through. First of all, it's a well-conceived schedule because there aren't a ton of games that are going to hurt your overall strength of schedule ranking. You've only got, I think, 3 teams that are sub 300 in KenPom: Alabama A&M to start, Lindenwood, and then Chicago State. You've got some intermediate games. You've got Incarnate Word, who's a decent team this year. You've got Milwaukee, who's 2-12. Bethune-Cookman is projected to be fairly decent. Siena on Monday the 22nd. And then you've got the bigger games. You've got Kansas State and Marquette, who are, roughly in that 50-ish range. So those are challenges, but those are games that you should be competitive in. You should win the Kansas State game, certainly. Marquette, we'll see. Because Indiana's in that same category. Like Indiana is around 50. I think they're 40. They're 40th right now in KenPom. I think they're 43rd in Torvik. And then you've got obviously the 2 big ones, the Louisville game and the Kentucky game, and those are, both a solid month into the season. So you're not throwing your team to the wolves right away at that point. Now, what's going to be fascinating, I think, about this schedule and the way that Indiana plays, and I talked about this a little bit on Twitter in the aftermath of the Baylor win in the preseason, is this is probably going to be a team that's a wild ride, because it's a team that's going to rely on 3-point shooting. It's going to rely on a lot of ball movement. It's going to rely on probably not having rebounding as its primary methodology of either scoring points or keeping the other team from scoring. And it's going to be focusing, if you think about the 4 factors, it's going to focus on effective field goal percentage. It's going to focus on not turning the ball over, and it's going to focus on probably getting to the free throw line. That would be my guess based upon what we've seen. If you look at what Darian DeVries has done over the course of his time, the last year at West Virginia, I don't know how much you can take out of that because it was 1 year and he was using largely somebody else's roster. But if you go back and look at his Drake teams and what they tried to focus on in terms of their statistical profile offensively, they really focused on shooting the ball as well as possible, and they were 25th in the country in effective field goal percentage the last year he was at Drake. Not turning the ball over. If you look at the last 4 years that he was at Drake, they were 13th, 38th, 31st, and 13th in offensive turnover percentage, which means they're hanging on to the ball, very Wisconsin-like in not turning the ball over and having that be a way that you limit inefficiencies. They really did not bother much the last 2 years with offensive rebounding. And their free throw rate was not that high. They didn't tend to get to the line a bunch because they were generally focusing more on jump shooting and three-point shooting. And then defensively, and this is where I'm really fascinated what happens with this team, they tended to really focus on limiting the other team's offensive rebounding. That is the one thing I think you could be significantly concerned about this year,
Right.
given the lack of height and size that Indiana is going to be rolling out there with. Can they still focus on taking away offensive rebounding? They were 4th in the country in limiting opponents' offensive rebounds in 2023 at Drake. They were 2nd in the country in 2024. Now those teams had not that much taller of a team. You had Tucker DeVries, Darnell Brody, and I think those are the only 2 players that played regularly that were over 6'7" or over 6'6" in height. So it's doable even with a smaller team. It's just those teams had coalesced over time. And I'm curious if that is a product of playing well together and knowing where you're at versus just a systems thing. And so there's a lot of unknowns about all of this, but I do think the schedule, the way it sets up, will lead to some variance simply because there might be a couple of games against weaker competition where the shots just aren't falling for Indiana. So can they overcome that with effort? And then against the bigger teams, yeah, you're going to have those games where Indiana could lose by 20, but there might be some games where you shoot yourself into a contending spot with 5 minutes to go just because you're shooting 48% from 3 for the game and the other team isn't.
As you mentioned all of that, the other thing that I think is going to be interesting in the wild ride component for this team is constructed to kind of play in the SEC, not the Big Ten. And I think that's good. It's constructed unlike Big Ten teams. Like you said, there's not a lot of height. And I'm going to be very curious to see how that fits in the Big Ten. And maybe we don't see as much Big Ten success. Maybe we do. Maybe this leads to more success outside the Big Ten or in a tournament setting. Because, the Big Ten has primarily been a slow down league, a lot of big guys, a lot of post play. It's kind of refereed that way. This is all, and it's not perfect. It's like just taking Auburn, just putting them in the Big Ten. What would that look like? How would they handle that? And it does feel like that's kind of what happening here. Talent is totally different. We're not an Auburn level type team, but I'm just curious to see how we navigate the Big Ten, how we're officiated, how we're treated, because it does feel like we are going against the archetype of what the Big Ten has normally been the last 10, 15 years.
Which I think you need to do because, you can't – Indiana is not getting the talent levels to beat Big Ten teams at their own game right now.
And we're not producing our own momentum with talent too. Yeah.
And look, I think it's one of the things about the Crean era that Crean deserves a lot of credit for was building a team that played differently than a lot of Big Ten teams played at that time. You think about the teams in the Big Ten that were dominant in the last half of the 2000s and into the early part of the 2010s. They looked more like those Ohio State teams with Greg Oden. They didn't look like, and it was interesting because Indiana built a team that was built around offense. They grew into being a pretty good defensive team. Michigan did the same thing. And both of those teams kind of came out of the wilderness, respectively, for both programs. And within a 3-4 year span, were competing for Big Ten titles and were national contenders. So I think it's smart for DeVries to tack against the wind, so to speak, try to build a roster that does something that's difficult to stop offensively and see what you can then backfill in terms of the portal and in terms of recruiting. And they've made some inroads on both of those fronts, which I think has been interesting to see. You look at the rest of the lineup that Indiana is going to be rolling out there. They bring in 2 point guards in Tate and Connerway and Connor Enright, who had assist rates over 36 last year. That's real good. And those are guys that, especially Connerway, He can get to the rim if he needs to, but he's also a really good distributor. You've got this gaggle of players that are between 6'6" and 6'8". We've already mentioned DeVries, Nick Dorn, Josiah Miles, Trent Sisley, the freshman, who's looked really good. Like I've really enjoyed seeing Trent Sisley in the preseason action so far. And then Sam Alexis, who was a bigger body than I expected. He's more of a traditional post type of player and looks like maybe the answer to play either with Reed Bailey or alongside or in place of Reed Bailey when Indiana needs more rebounding, as opposed to Bailey, who's more of an outside player, kind of a wing forward. So I do like the idea that, their top 9, top 10 contributors. It's a pretty flexible lineup overall. Outside of Enright, who's pretty small, everybody feels like they can switch. Everybody feels like you can play them in a variety of different situations. And I think it's going to be an interesting team for opposing squads try to figure out how to guard. It's just then the question becomes, how well does this team match up? Does Indiana match up defensively against the teams they're going to be playing? Right now, both Ken Pom and Torvik have Indiana at 18 and 13 overall and 10 and 10 in conference. That's, when you look at the way that breaks down, Indiana's projected to be in the 80s in a bunch of games this upcoming year, which feels like a decided departure from how they've played over the course of the last several seasons offensively. But they're also projected to give up like 68 plus points in a ton of games throughout the course of this season. To me, that might be the fulcrum point for this team. Can they score enough points where they don't have to hold their opponents under 66 a game? Or if not, if they can't score that much, can their defense become good enough that is not a hindrance to them winning more than 18 games, maybe 20, 21, 22 down the stretch as it goes?
Can I, if you're able to pull up the Ken Pom schedule again, the section that worries me is January 13th to February 7th. And this is just, again, unfortunately, based on the schedule and the way it breaks down, I worry about another swoon or just a couple of losses stacking up here.
Yep.
You start January 13th, you're at Michigan State, which has not been a great place for us to play. You come home for Iowa, which is a team right at your level. But then it gets really tough. You're at Michigan, you're at Rutgers, home for Purdue, at UCLA, at USC, and you come home for Wisconsin, a team that's at your level, but probably above, but we haven't played well either. That's a section where it's like I could see us losing 4 or 5 in a row. I mean, that Michigan, Rutgers, Purdue, UCLA, USC stretch, there's a chance you go 1-4 or 0 for 5 in that stretch. And it's probably unfair because of what we're dealing with, and that's a little bit of scheduling, but it also it leads into what you and I have been talking about is like one of these years you have to just stop it. You have to figure out a way to, everyone's got a tough schedule. Everyone's going to have rough travel. Everyone's going to have 2 or 3 in a row where you don't want, the 3 tough games in a row. This is where, and maybe it's not fair in the first year, but like this is what DeVries has inherited is like at some point you got to stop it. And it's sections like this where maybe it's not this year, but I'm really curious to see how they fight through a section like that, because that's the next level in kind of bringing this program back is can you make sure that in that stretch I just laid out, you don't lose 5 of 6? Can you go 2 and 3 and kind of spread those losses out? Maybe lose 1, win 1, lose 1, win 1. Can you do that? Because that's kind of what the upper level teams, the Big Ten too, but that the Big Ten do. But that's a stretch that I'm worried about because again, honestly, you could keep going because after that you're home for Oregon, but then you go at Illinois and at Purdue. So it's like even after that stretch, it gets rough. Big Ten's good, but you can't just use that as a crutch. At some point, you can't have 4 and 5 game losing streaks.
I mean, if you look at the way the Big Ten is projected right now, I mean, it's a really, really good conference. It's probably going to be the best conference depth-wise in college basketball this year. I think it'll be better than the SEC is this year. Not as good as the SEC was last year. That was
all of our SEO. We just had ESPN had us up the rankings. Now they're just taking us back to Feinbaum's like, get that CrimsonCast off the feed.
We'll be okay on that front. You know what? It's fine. But look, the thing with the Big Ten and in this year in particular is you have 2 elite offenses in Purdue and Illinois. And then you've got two elite defenses in UCLA and Michigan, at least according to the numbers. And I'm really fascinated once you get past those four teams, who emerges, because I feel like you could make really good arguments for any four of those teams to win the Big Ten. My personal pick this year is probably going to be Illinois. I think it's their time to pull something off. It wouldn't shock me if Purdue won the title this year again. But you get past that, and it's like Wisconsin, USC, Michigan State, Ohio State, Maryland, Oregon, Indiana, Washington, and I guess Iowa all have some question marks about how they are going to be able to handle the circumstances, surrounding what they do. They've all got really good pieces in spots. There's some coaches that are in some interesting spots throughout this whole stretch. I mean, you've got Greg Gard, who's, needing to get things really jump started there. You've got, the USC situation is fascinating with Eric Musselman. You've got Izzo, who continues to roll along at Michigan State, but it's like, well, is the game passed him by a little bit? You've got Ohio State, who's in a put up or shut up year. I mean, just like there's a bunch of really fascinating storylines. And then you got Indiana in the middle of all of that. And
Right.
I think Indiana right now is the biggest question mark, simply because you just don't know how they're going to react to a new coach with a brand new set of players, with a brand new system, a system that is very different from what a lot of other teams are doing in the conference. I don't really have a clear sense of what to expect, and I don't think anybody else does either. I mean, there'll be a lot of people who will go out and say, well, Indiana's going to miss the tournament this year. Or there'll be people who will be like, Indiana's the surprise team. They're going to win 22 games. I don't think anybody at the end of the year should take a victory lap about their predictions for Indiana, because we're all guessing at this point about what they're going to do. But you think about, like, you got Buzz Williams starting at Maryland after, a long stretch with Kevin Willard. And Buzz Williams is a really good coach. Can he turn things around?
For the first 5 years.
Well, I mean, but we're in that first 5 years. That's all that matters.
I know.
You got Ben McCollum taking over at Iowa. Some people think they're going to be a dark horse. Some people think Ben McCollum won't be able to get them going very quickly because that style may not work in the Big Ten. You've got Jake Diebler at Ohio State, who was kind of a questionable hire, and it's kind of a head scratcher as to whether or not he's going to be around after this year. So there's just a lot of those types of stories. That middle of the Big Ten is going to be pretty brutal. And I mean, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams projected to finish somewhere between 11 and 9 and 9 and 11 in the conference this season. And it's an unbalanced schedule. We won't know till later how tough or easy the schedule is, but can you get the right sequence of games to where you can finish on the positive side of 10 and 10? I think that ends up really being the barometer for whether or not Indiana is going to have what we would classify as a successful season. I will say, like, the only scenario I see where fans look at this and say completely unsuccessful season is not whether or not the team makes or misses the tournament, but it's whether or not people are watching this team and saying, that team's playing really, really hard. That team is demonstrating that they're staying in games. It does feel like Indiana's left some games on the table over the previous few seasons where they weren't playing hard enough,
right?
And they did leave some stuff on the table, and that meant they lost those games instead of won them. I think that will be something that, recognizing how tough the top of the conference is, can Indiana do something where they demonstrate that, yeah, we're going to pull a couple of these games out that we might not have pulled out in previous years. It almost felt accidental sometimes with previous teams, and that's not to take anything away from the individual efforts in those games, but when you're having to rely on that as at the end of games rather than playing hard throughout the course of the games, which oftentimes felt like the case. And we talk about the swoons in terms of like losing 7 or 9 games, those swoons where Indiana would go several minutes without scoring or getting outscored like 15-2. That's the thing that's really got to get tamped down by DeVries and his staff. And that's the thing I'm most fascinated about seeing this year.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, you talk about what is a successful season, or, how do you categorize this as a good season? I mean, an easy barometer is making the tournament. And I don't think that's out of bounds, but to me, it's more, I'm going to kind of use one of your terms, like it's a vibe check. Like, what's the vibe of this team? And if this team plays with kind of a funky vibe but makes the tournament, I'm going to be a little nervous. If they play with a really good vibe, it's like, man, this team plays hard. And it's like if you end the year, it's like, man, they got something. Like something is brewing that feels really good, and they don't make the tournament. That actually is a better season for me than just a lot of things broke. And it's like, man, it's still like we're still having a lot of the same problems, and you sneak into the tournament as an 11 seed. So to me, it really becomes kind of a vibe checky season. And like you said, how do they play at home? I think is going to be a big thing for me as well, because that's something, going back to the beginning part of this podcast, part of what ended up kind of being the nail in the coffin for both Archie and Woodson were these horrible games, either in, one in Indy, but, the game against Illinois last year at home where you're just blown off your home court. You're not going to go undefeated at home in college basketball, especially a team like Indiana right now.
Right.
But can you protect home court, and can you not give up 20-0 runs? Can you not lose by double digits at home multiple times in the season? And can you pull off some wins? Can you go above 500 at home? Can you really show you're playing hard at home? I think that's a big thing. But yeah, I think a successful season to me, I'd love to make the tournament. I think that would be nice, but I think it's more vibe checking. Just does it look like you're putting something together? Honestly, looking at like DeVries' last year at West Virginia, a year where it's like, man, some things worked out, and now there were some injuries. And it's like they didn't make the tournament. If that year happened here, and we, things kind of got derailed because of some injuries, but it's like, man, they played really hard, and they had a couple games like, dude, they really put things together. And if another year of this feels like now we're on the right track, like I would take last year's Virginia year, this year, West Virginia year, and not be pissed, even though we didn't make the tournament.
No, it's a good point. And you're right. I mean, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin, it felt like last year with Woodson. You lose 94-69 at home to Illinois, and then you turn around and lose to Maryland at home in the next home game, and then you turn around and lose at home to Michigan with Dusty May as the coach, and then you turn around and lose.
Doing a watch party? I mean, come on, we were doing a watch party at the pub,
and then you lose to UCLA, and yeah, they closed. They beat Purdue at home. I mean, they get credit for that, but this is how you get the fans back on your side program-wise, and that's going to be the interesting thing to watch.
So. As you say all the time, like we're doing a podcast, we're trying to extrapolate and all that. Like in the end, it could be very simple. Like just win games.
Yeah.
Well, like honestly, like in the end, you are right with Archie, Woodson, like all of this, you end up starting to dissect smaller things because you're not winning a ton. Like you just win those games. Like just go. If you would have won 5 of those games instead of losing 5, it's a different story. And same thing, in the end, same thing for DeVries. Like win games and win more games, and the more you win, the better things will be.
And some of that is going to be relying on recruiting and getting higher level players in as you move forward. But Indiana going old this year and going with established players, albeit in many cases from lower levels, that's going to be the big question mark. But you're right. Like ultimately, we tend to overcomplicate this stuff, and you only really ever have conversations about fan impatience or what are we expecting out of college basketball these days when you're not winning games.
Right.
And you never have those conversations at places where you're winning games, at least not to that depth. And so that is really all we need to think about going into this year is, can Indiana win games? So how many games is Indiana win in the regular season? What do you got, Scott?
I think I want to say just I kind of want to go with the exact Ken Pom 18-13, 10-10 it seems pretty much on the nose, but I'm going to be a little more optimistic. This is not I think they'll get to 20 wins. I think they'll get to 20 wins, and I think they'll go above 500 in the Big Ten by a game and go like 11-9 in the Big Ten. I'm not sure where it's going to happen. I think this team's going to be slightly better than people think. I think they will make the tournament as probably like an 11 or a 10 seed. I could even see maybe getting to 12 wins in the Big Ten. But I think part of it's going to be the Big Ten is just so good, and the top level of the Big Ten is so good. And there's some stretches, as you see, where it's just going to be tough to win games. But I would say 20 wins and 11 in the Big Ten, although I think 21-12 is not off the table.
Yeah, I'm going to go 19-12 in the regular season. I'll say 11-9. Look, I think it's going to be a fun team to watch. I just think there's going to be a ton of variance because of the 3-point shooting, but I think they'll pull off a couple of big upsets that we're not expecting, and then there'll be a random game they drop here or there where you're just like, whoa, what happened? We're going to find out early how well this team plays defense. That game you're going to in Chicago will be a great starting point for that. Marquette not projected to be. They're like right on the fringe of potentially being a tournament team this year. That's a nice early test. But ultimately, I think this Indiana team, is itself going to be on the fringe of the tournament. I think they'll be good enough to shoot themselves into some victories. And really, it's going to come down to what's the effort look like on defense and how does Indiana put themselves in a position over the course of the season, assuming there aren't a ton of injuries or other obstacles. Do they put themselves in a position where they are providing the consistent levels of effort that I think Indiana fans really crave, and that will maybe start to get people fully back on the bandwagon? Might take a couple of years, but this first year is going to be an important starting point.
I'll just fever dream into the college basketball podcast. If we beat Marquette and we go into that game against Louisville 8-0, and Indiana is also playing the Big Ten football title game that evening at Lucas Oil, are you looking around for just like the chip in your brain to take you out? Like
I am, yes.
I mean, like imagine that is like everyone like myself was looking at that day of like, all right, man, that's an IU day. Like that could be such a pro IU crowd at Gamebridge. All this talk, that's a moment. Like, I mean, it's not going to be easy. Louisville's a really good team, but that could be a moment where you have that crowd, and it's like,
I can't believe you're talking about this like this.
Why not? Let's have some fun. Come on. Basketball has been such a slog for 8 years. Let's have some fever dreamy fun. That could be such an pro IU crowd where you just have people fired up. It's like, dude, we're going to win this. We're going to win the Big Ten title. I could see a situation where you're 8-0, and like that just becomes the moment where it's like IU basketball could feel like, holy crap, we're coming back. And maybe the crowd pushes that team to a win in Gamebridge on December 6th.
Well, we'll see. I'm not going to engage in any conversation on this, but I'm glad that you felt compelled to talk about it. But no, I'll say this. I think ultimately the overall setup for Indiana is a fascinating one to start the season. Yeah. And if anything, I think football's success has awarded Darian DeVries with something that neither of the previous two hires that Indiana has made have gotten, which is some cover.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And that's a fascinating thing. I never thought we'd see the day where football gave cover to basketball to try to put things together. It's almost always been the other way around. And so
it's a great call. It's so true.
So we'll see how they fare. And I'm fascinated to watch the team. I'm looking forward to going to games. And I mean, I've been to a ton of games as you have over the course of the last several years. It's always interesting to see how these seasons play out. And college basketball has changed so fundamentally over the last 25 years from what we were used to. And Indiana, I think, still wants to be good in basketball. And this is an interesting direction they've chosen. I like the early returns, but I'm curious to see how it all works out. So,
well, last thing, just high level Big Ten to talk about. You highlighted all the coaching changes in the Big Ten the last couple years. And the mainstays in Izzo and Painter are, Izzo is nearing the end of the run. Painter is younger than you would think, but it's still like he's been there quite a while. It does feel as if we're in a bit of a transition period, and there is kind of who are the next couple of coaches that are going to run this league for the next decade. That discussion is out there, and that's also a cool place to be, where you're not making this change at a point where it's like, man, you've got to go against 6 coaches who are just owning this league. Like, it does feel like a lot of the Big Ten and what the next decade of power in the Big Ten looks like is kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I mean, you might be in the middle of the Purdue, period of the Big Ten, but everybody is not sitting still at this point.
Right.
And I like what Brad Underwood's putting together at Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, he might be the one who's already got a head start and taken over, but
you never know. I mean, between Dusty May and you've got a lot of different types of coaches who are in the mix now, and it is, I think, the Big Ten's needed to have this type of a cycle renewal for a long time, and I'm glad that we're finally seeing it fully taking hold. It's taken a few years. Some of these coaches were hired a while ago. I think DeVries is a great addition. I think he's a young coach with a modern perspective on what basketball should be. And I'm really curious to see how he ends up slotting in with the rest of the coaches in the league. And it's something we won't know for a few years, but it's cool to kind of see it right now on the ground floor, because you've got some guys who look like long-term guys. Painter's a long-term guy. Dusty May looks like a long-term guy. you've got some Reynolds, you've got Musselman, you've got
Right.
Buzz Williams. I mean, it's a really fascinating mixture in the Big Ten right now, and I am really curious to see how it ends up playing out and how all these stylistic shifts that these various coaches are bringing to the table, all these wrinkles end up equating, or what they equate to as we go along. So anyway, that'll wrap it up for us. We appreciate you folks as always. We'll be around with basketball coverage throughout the course of the 25-26 season. Thanks to our sponsors, Homefield Apparel and Posh Hotel Bloomington. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is CrimsonCast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.